The room was silent, lit only by the blue glare of a laptop screen. Ethan Carter sat hunched forward, his eyes locked on the upload progress bar. It crawled with agonizing slowness. Every pixel of progress felt like a heavy weight being lifted. He had no professional studio, no high-end equipment, just a standard webcam and a stack of notes he had spent months refining. He tapped his finger against the desk, a steady, rhythmic sound that filled the stagnant air. The bar reached 90%, then hung there, frozen for a heartbeat. He held his breath, staring at the blinking cursor, waiting for the server to acknowledge the file. Then, it jumped. The screen flashed a confirmation message. Upload complete. He clicked the mouse once to close the window, the sharp sound echoing against the bare walls. He pushed the laptop back, the screen fading to black. He sat for a moment in the dark, listening to the hum of the cooling fan before it eventually died down into total silence. The file was out there now. He stood up, stretched his stiff back, and walked toward the door, leaving the empty room behind. The morning sun was sharp, cutting through the office blinds and landing directly on his keyboard. Ethan sat at his cubicle, the hum of the ventilation system replacing the silence of his room. He clicked through spreadsheets, his eyes tracing rows of data that meant nothing to him. Every time his phone buzzed, he glanced at it, expecting a notification, but saw only corporate emails. A supervisor walked by, tapped a folder onto his desk, and issued a deadline for a report due by noon. Ethan stared at the stack of paper. It felt heavy, a physical manifestation of the hours he was trading away. He looked around the floor. Others were locked into the same rhythm, eyes glazed, hands moving in automated motions. He opened a new tab, hovering his cursor over the video platform, but shut it instantly when a shadow crossed his desk. He forced himself to focus on the report. He typed, deleted, and retyped, but his mind kept drifting back to the raw footage sitting on a server somewhere in the ether. The gap between his work here and the work he had finished at home felt like a canyon. He picked up his coffee, felt the lukewarm liquid hit his throat, and stared at the clock. It was only 9:15. The calendar turned, but the screen stayed stagnant. 2 years passed in a rhythmic cycle of filming, uploading, and waiting. Every Tuesday, Ethan sat in the same chair, adjusted the camera, and recorded his thoughts on business, but the numbers remained stubbornly near zero. He grew accustomed to the digital void. He would wake up, check the dashboard, and see the same empty bars staring back at him. It was a slow, grinding erosion of his expectations. Sometimes he would stare at the refresh button, his finger hovering over the mouse, wondering if the server was even registering his existence. The lack of feedback was a heavy, suffocating weight. It felt like shouting into a vacuum where sound had no meaning. He watched his own reflection in the darkened monitor, seeing the exhaustion etched into his posture. Friends stopped asking about his progress, and the initial excitement of the project withered into a dull, persistent ache. He spent nights staring at the ceiling, questioning if the effort was merely a delusion. The threat of walking away became a daily companion, pulling at his resolve every time he hit publish on a video that no one would watch. He was invisible, and the silence was becoming louder than his ambition. The dashboard rarely flickered with more than 3 views. Often, it stayed at 2-1 from his own account, and one that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He tracked these digits like a pulse, but the heartbeat was weak. The sting of rejection was not a sudden blow. It was a constant, dull vibration. He would lean back, the chair creaking in the stillness of his room, and watch the screen go dark. No comments, no shares, no validation. He once saw a single comment pop up, only for it to be a bot link, which he deleted with a sharp, impatient click. The urge to pull the plug was a physical pressure in his chest. He would reach for the power button, his hand hovering, his skin itching to close the chapter on this failed experiment. But he never pushed it. Instead, he forced his hand to the camera trigger. He wiped the lens with his thumb, cleared his throat, and looked directly into the glass. He knew the algorithm was ignoring him, but he refused to ignore himself. He adjusted the angle, checked his lighting, and began the script again. He was building a house that no one had visited yet, but he laid every brick with the same focus as if the world were watching. Ethan stopped guessing why the audience stayed away and started looking for the proof in his own recordings. He began to play back every video, not as a creator, but as a critic. He noticed his pauses were too long. His tone fluctuated in ways that undercut his authority, and his explanations grew tangled when he reached the core concepts. He grabbed a notepad and started mapping his own delivery. He timed his sentences, marking the exact moments his energy dipped. It was no longer about the views, it was about the mechanics of the performance. He spent hours dissecting the structure of his arguments, cutting away the fluff until only the logic remained. He treated his script like an engine, pulling it apart and putting it back together until every gear turned smoothly. When he recorded again, he did not just talk at the lens. He adjusted his posture, locked his focus, and controlled the cadence of every word. He rehearsed lines until they felt like second nature, removing the hesitation that had haunted his early attempts. He stopped waiting for a breakthrough and started building one edit at a time. The room was still dim, but his approach was precise. He was no longer just a man with a camera. He was a student of his own failures, systematically engineering the quality he had previously lacked. The focus shifted from how he spoke to what he actually said. Ethan stopped filming for a week, turning his desk into a workspace of scattered notes and highlighted textbooks on market theory and organizational structure. He devoured complex concepts, breaking down case studies of companies that thrived and those that folded. He realized his early scripts were thin, lacking the weight of actual evidence. He began to synthesize these high-level principles into simpler, actionable frameworks. He would write a draft, test the logic against a real-world scenario, and if it failed to hold up, he started over. The process was grueling. He spent entire weekends mapping out supply chains and revenue models just to explain a single point in a 3-minute video. He was no longer just creating content, he was building a curriculum. He filled journals with bullet points, refining his delivery to ensure every sentence carried maximum utility. His subscriber count remained stubbornly low, a static number that mocked his effort. But he ignored the dashboard entirely. He was obsessed with the density of his message. He recorded, reviewed, and deleted more than he published, discarding hours of work that did not meet his new standard of excellence. He was stacking knowledge, preparing a foundation of value, waiting for the moment when the world would finally look his way. The routine became a cage. Every evening, Ethan returned to the same desk, adjusted the same lights, and spoke to the same empty digital room. The hum of the laptop fan was the only audience he had. Weeks blurred into months. He watched the view counts tick up by single digits, a slow, agonizing crawl that offered no validation for the hours spent crafting his scripts. The solitude of the process began to bite. He caught himself staring at the wall between takes, wondering if the effort was simply vanishing into a void. He felt the pull to stop, to fold the laptop and walk away from the screen that promised nothing back. He forced himself to sit, to frame the shot, and to hit record again. He treated the act of filming like a physical training session, building muscle through repetition even when no one was watching. He cataloged his files, organized his drafts, and uploaded each piece with the same clinical precision. He was not just making videos, he was stacking bricks for a wall he had not yet seen. He kept his head down, ignored the silence of the internet, and ensured that every file in his archive was ready. He was building a library of value, a silent arsenal of logic and advice, waiting for a single unpredictable spark to ignite the foundation he had laid. Tuesday began like every other day. Ethan woke to the low hum of the city, poured a cup of lukewarm coffee, and sat at his desk to scan his emails before heading to his job. The morning light hit the screen, washing out the details of his dashboard. He didn't expect anything different. He had stopped looking for spikes months ago, treating the platform as a storage locker for his work rather than a stage. He clicked the icon to check for any stray comments or new subscribers, his movements practiced and entirely mechanical. He reached for his notepad to write down a list of tasks for the day. A flicker of movement on the monitor caught his eye. It was small, a single digit changing in the corner of the stats panel. He blinked, assuming it was a glitch in the browser. He refreshed the page, expecting the numbers to reset to their usual stagnant state. They didn't. Instead, the count ticked forward again, a steady, rhythmic pulse that felt out of place in the quiet room. He leaned in, his coffee forgotten on the desk. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with a sudden, sharp pressure. He placed his hands on the keyboard, his fingers hovering over the keys, and prepared to refresh the data one more time. He clicked refresh. The page loaded, and the numbers didn't stop. They spun. The view counter blurred, shifting from double digits to hundreds in the space of a single breath. Ethan pulled his hand back from the mouse as if the plastic had turned white hot. The screen flickered, a jagged pulse of light reflecting in his eyes. He watched the digit in the thousands place climb, then jump, then climb again. It was a mechanical, relentless sprint. A cold jolt of adrenaline hit his chest, turning his skin tight. He stood up, knocking his chair back against the wall, but he couldn't look away. The dashboard was alive. Every time he blinked, the count surged further. He grabbed the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white, sensing the sheer momentum of the data flowing into his account. The algorithm had found him. The void he had been speaking to for 2 years was finally screaming back. He watched the numbers spin past 10,000, 20,000, the pace accelerating into a blur of raw, uncontained energy. The silence of the room was gone, replaced by the internal roar of a life-changing realization. He was no longer just a creator. He was a target for the world's attention. 10,000. The number sat on the screen, frozen for a heartbeat before ticking over again. The threshold had been crossed. Ethan exhaled, a long, shaky breath that drained the remaining tension from his shoulders. He didn't celebrate. He didn't call anyone. Instead, he pulled his chair back to the desk and sat down with a new, clinical focus. The public was watching, and they were no longer just observers. A notification pinged the first of many, then another. He scanned the comments, his eyes darting across the text. They weren't just views. They were demands for depth, for more, for better. The weight of his own preparation pressed down on him. He had spent years studying these principles in solitude, and now the test had arrived. He wiped his hands on his palms and reached for the keyboard. He stopped looking at the view count. It was a metric of the past. He opened a blank document, the cursor blinking in a steady, rhythmic cadence. He began to outline a curriculum, breaking down his messy notes into a structured, scalable course. He was no longer waiting for permission to succeed. He was building the foundation to support the surge. Every keystroke felt deliberate, precise, and final. By Wednesday, the dashboard was no longer a tool. It was a firestorm. The numbers didn't tick, they surged. Every time he reloaded the page, the count climbed by thousands. He tried to read the incoming messages, but the stream moved too fast. A wall of text cascaded down the screen, a relentless deluge of questions, demands, and urgent requests for more information. The notification bell on his laptop pinged continuously, a rapid, high-pitched rhythm that bled into the hum of the cooling fan. Ethan watched the progress bar of the video's reach. It was climbing toward the million mark, a speed that defied all his previous experience. His office grew hot, the air heavy with the intensity of the machine working overtime. He pushed the laptop slightly away, needing distance from the constant flickering activity. The screen glowed with the weight of 1 million eyes. By Friday afternoon, the count clicked over to 7 figures. The million-view threshold was breached. The chaos had reached its peak. He stood up, paced the length of the room, and stared at the dark window. The world had arrived at his door, and the silence of his past life was officially dead. The million-view milestone was a number on a screen, nothing more. Ethan shut the dashboard tab. He did not watch it climb. He did not refresh the page to see the new totals. That phase was finished. He pulled a notepad from under a stack of old files and clicked a pen. His hands were steady. He had spent years breaking down business logic, testing theories, and failing in the dark. Now, the audience was demanding the blueprint. He didn't offer a thank you video. He didn't post a reaction clip. Instead, he mapped out a curriculum. Module 1, the fundamentals of market entry. Module 2, risk mitigation. Module 3, scaling operations. He worked with a cold, surgical precision. Every line he wrote was a step away from being a creator who relied on algorithms and toward becoming an owner who relied on systems. He transformed the raw, chaotic demand of 1 million viewers into a structured path of education. The screen was no longer a mirror for his ego. It was a whiteboard for his venture. He typed the final lesson plan and saved the file to a secure drive. The amateur era was over. The business had begun. Ethan moved to the video description, deleted the placeholder text, and pasted the link to the payment portal. He hit save. The page refreshed, displaying the new, active call to action. He sat back, watching the cursor blink in the empty field of the payment dashboard. It was a test of value. If his audience was serious, the link would bridge the gap between curiosity and commitment. 3 minutes passed in total silence. Then, a notification pinged the first transaction. Then another. The screen shifted from a dormant interface to a live feed of incoming revenue. He watched the numbers climb. 5, 20, 50. Each ping was a signal that his years of unacknowledged work had finally hit the market. He stopped refreshing his video stats and started monitoring the ledger. By the end of the 48th hour, the count hit 100. 100 people had exchanged their own resources for his expertise. The validation was absolute. He leaned back, staring at the total sum on his monitor. The amateur hobby was officially dead. The business was now a functioning entity, turning abstract attention into real-world capital. The revenue sitting in the account was no longer just capital. It was time. Ethan stared at the raw footage for the next set of modules, then at the clock. He had spent 10 hours editing the last video, a task that yielded diminishing returns compared to the time he needed for strategy. He opened a freelance marketplace, drafted a clear set of technical requirements, and posted the job. He did not look for a friend or a fan. He looked for a professional who could handle the frame-by-frame grind. Within hours, the applications flooded in. He selected a candidate with a portfolio that matched his vision, sent the contract, and transferred the first payment from the course revenue. The next morning, he sent a hard drive of raw files to the editor. For the first time in 3 years, the screen stayed dark while the work continued. He walked away from the desk. He spent the afternoon sketching the long-term roadmap for his membership community instead of scrubbing through timelines. The transition was sharp. He was no longer the sole engine of the production. He was the architect of a system that functioned without his constant intervention. The organization had begun to take shape. With the editor handling production, Ethan turned his focus to the audience retention problem. Viral traffic was a wave. He needed a harbor. He mapped out a private membership community, a gated space where the most engaged viewers could access direct consulting and deeper technical archives. He built the structure on a subscription model, replacing the unpredictable nature of ad-supported views with recurring monthly revenue. He coded the access permissions and integrated a login portal. The first wave of members joined within minutes of the announcement. He monitored the dashboard as the visitor list migrated from the public platform into his private database. He observed the data. These were not fleeting clicks, but active participants paying for ongoing access. He set up automated feedback loops to gauge their needs, ensuring the content he commissioned from his editor was directly aligned with his members' goals. The shift was absolute. He was no longer dependent on the algorithm's favor. By the end of the week, he had successfully converted the volatile viral attention into a stable, recurring asset. The business was no longer a video channel. It was a self-sustaining client network. A rival creator cornered him at a conference, eyes fixed on the view counts that still trended upward. He leaned in, voice lowered, asking how Ethan managed the sudden surge of public recognition and the pressure of the spotlight. Ethan did not answer about the comments or the accolades. He pulled his laptop from his bag, opened his banking portal, and turned the screen toward the man. He pointed to the column of recurring revenue, not the tally of views. The rival blinked, confused by the shift from popularity to balance sheets. Ethan closed the lid with a sharp click, the sound cutting through the ambient noise of the room. The video was just a signal, he said. He did not care for the temporary noise of a viral moment. He had already moved past the vanity of audience metrics. The rival stood silent as Ethan walked toward the exit, his focus already on the next quarterly projection. He had successfully decoupled his identity from the screen. He was no longer a creator chasing relevance. He was an owner building a portfolio. The interaction was over and he did not look back. Ethan moved to eliminate the final bottleneck, his own time. He spent weeks drafting protocols that turned his consulting advice into a series of automated response modules. He integrated these into the membership database, allowing new clients to receive tailored roadmaps without his direct input. The consulting flow became a self-running loop. With the operational side secured, he turned to the capital sitting in his accounts. He did not let cash stagnate. He programmed a recurring transfer system that funneled surplus revenue directly into a diversified portfolio of index funds. He watched the logs as the logic executed itself. Every transaction was triggered by preset rules, not by his daily intervention. The business began to function like a clockwork machine. He monitored the dashboard from his desk, observing the metrics tick upward in real time. The revenue grew, the system scaled, and his presence was no longer required for the core operations to function. He had built an engine that operated in the background of his life. He sat back, watching the automated reports confirm the efficiency of the model he had constructed. The system was now fully autonomous, running with a precision he had spent years refining. 3 years had passed since the first upload. Ethan sat in a quiet, minimalist office, the hum of the city muffled by double-paned glass. The space was devoid of clutter, reflecting the order he had imposed on his finances, ars litera. He sat before a single, high-resolution monitor and initialized the annual financial audit. The cursor blinked, a rhythmic pulse, as the software aggregated data from his various consulting entities and investment accounts. He watched the progress bar fill, the weight of 1,000 decisions distilled into a single digital document. The screen refreshed. The final digit hovered, then locked into place. His net worth had crossed the $1 million mark. He did not cheer or stand. He simply leaned back, his eyes tracing the line of growth from the early, stagnant days to this point of undeniable scale. The number was not a stroke of luck. It was the result of the systems he had engineered, the automated processes he had nurtured, and the capital he had disciplined. He tapped the desk once, a final confirmation of the goal reached. The transition from a struggling creator to a systematic owner was complete. He had turned a singular, fleeting signal into a permanent, scalable asset. Ethan turned his attention away from the $1 million report. He navigated to the deep, forgotten archives of his storage drive. The directory was thick with years of content, but he scrolled back until the file names changed from polished, professional assets to the raw, unedited captures of his early days. He clicked on the very first video. The file name was simple, lacking the branding he had since mastered. It opened in a small window. He watched his younger self on the screen, speaking to a webcam that barely held focus. The room behind him was dim, cluttered with the remnants of his old desk job life. He listened to the pitch, the voice hesitant, the delivery unrefined, the business principles laid out with a desperate, earnest intensity. He did not see a master of industry. He saw the flicker of a match before the forest fire. He reached out and paused the playback, his finger resting on the screen over the face of his past self. The contrast between that moment of near-total silence and his current, automated reality was absolute. He sat in the quiet, tracing the edges of that original upload, recognizing it as the singular point of origin for everything he had built since. Ethan pressed the close button on the browser. The video window vanished, leaving only the clean, black wallpaper of his desktop. He stood up and pushed the chair back, the wheels gliding silently over the floor. He walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline, a landscape of competing businesses and shifting markets. He did not feel the urgency that had defined his early years. There was no need to check the view count or refresh the dashboard. The systems he built were running in the background, processing transactions and managing client lists while he stood still. He had taken a brief, explosive moment of viral attention and hammered it into a permanent, scalable foundation. The fame had been a temporary signal, but the infrastructure was the engine. He turned back to the room, reached out, and pulled the lid of his laptop down. It clicked into place with a soft, final sound. He walked toward the door, leaving the quiet office behind. He did not look back. The asset was active, the processes were automated, and his work was done. He stepped into the hallway, leaving the legacy to sustain itself.